Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to tonight's Royal Television Society Technical Centre's virtual event. You are highly encouraged to make use of the Q&A box here on Zoom, and we'll hopefully have time to get to your questions at the end of this session. We would like to issue a trigger warning ahead of our discussion tonight. We'll be covering sensitive subject matter, and we will ensure that support services are available on the Royal Television Society website afterwards. Now, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Kim Rowell, Managing Editor of News Production for ITN, a trustee and board member for UN Women UK, and a Royal Television Society Technology Centre committee member. And it gives me great pleasure to have organised this event for you this evening. To be able to confront challenging subject matter head on in the media often takes creativity. Visual representation of the action, impact, and aftermath of violent and emotional acts, even more so. Careful shot choices, prop utilization, music, makeup, and often it's what's left unsaid that can be more powerful than the blindingly explicit. This panel for the Royal Television Society Technology Centre on tackling the taboo has brought together a representative group of journalists, filmmakers, a charity founder, as well as a rape survivor and campaigner, all willing to share their insights and experience of working within these types of production approaches and parameters. I'm so thrilled to be able to introduce you to an incredibly talented bunch of people: Jade Blue McCrossen-Nethercott, Blanca Muñoz, Ashni Lakhani, Harrar, and SUKKI. Now, Jade and Blanca, I'd like to come to you first and discuss your phenomenal project, Sexsomnia. But first of all, if we could take a look at a short clip from the documentary.
There is that sense of shame in like, what could I have done differently to make sure that this didn't happen? Why did you do this? Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you wake up? Because I was raped while I was asleep. I suffer from sexsomnia, they're suggesting. Okay, well, I'm not done fighting yet.
Blanca and Jade, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Blanca, when you were first introduced to Jade's stories, all of its intricacies and how it develops and unraveled, what were your main considerations from a visual storytelling and depiction point of view?
Hello, Kim, and everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today, and of course, alongside Jade as well. So I guess it's worth mentioning that, we didn't know where the story was taking us, because we were following, Jade's journey as she was finding out herself what was happening with her case. So it's worth mentioning that, Emma, who directed this film and worked alongside Jade for 3 years, wanted to follow a rape case through justice, because very few ones are actually prosecuted by the CPS, let alone actually make it to court in the UK. And it felt like actually Jade's case was going to be one of the few ones that actually makes it to court, until 2 weeks before getting there, the case gets dropped because the defense team alleges that Jade consenting while she was having a sexsomnia attack while she was sleeping, and the case gets dropped, is closed, and then the defendant is found not guilty. So that's really when Emma started to film with Jade, we didn't know this was gonna happen, and then we didn't know what Jade was gonna find out about her case, what was gonna happen, would she be able to open it or not. So it was quite difficult to try to understand how we're gonna tell Jade's story in a way that feels representative and accurate, and that she feels comfortable with. Will it be through VO? Will we just sync only and forget about the VO? Or is it going to be a case of having master interviews that keep popping up along the way? So we didn't know it, to be honest. And that was a challenge when it came to filming, to be honest. But what Emma always had clear, and the team shared with her, is that we had to be with Jade along the way. We were so privileged, to have the trust of Jade to follow her through such a traumatic experience, as she felt. And we knew that we didn't want to take the audience away from those moments of raw frustration and pain, and discovery as well. So we always shy away from any sort of recon or anything that felt very overproduced. We wanted to be there with Jade, and we were able to do that because, her collaboration was beyond anything we would have expected, because Jade asked for every evidence involved in her case once it got closed. That involved CCTV footage from the body cam of the police, that involved police interviews, where you could see Jade clearly, not knowing, how to navigate this whole system, very raw moments and very, very private moments that Jade was happy to share with us after conversations, of course, and dealing with it properly. So yeah, we were able, in that case, to be with Jade along the way, because we had so many different ways to actually tell the story in situ with her, and not be able to use recon. And obviously, which goes back to Jade now, always making sure that she understood why we needed those moments to tell the story, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that it keeps people engaged, that people stay there with her. So yeah, we always had very open conversations with Jade about why we needed what we needed, basically.
And it's fair to say, Jade, the production processes was all relatively new for you, wasn't it? And it was such a vulnerable position to put yourself in, and you had an awful lot of trust that you had to put in Blanca Emma as well, the producer and director who's not with us this evening. But what was it that made you feel comfortable enough to allow them to tell your story?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very alien experience to go into. I would essentially say that I think my main concerns initially were kind of about being able to understand how they were going to portray my story, and have like faith in them to be able to do that in such a way that's not going to, I don't know, make me feel uncomfortable or anything like that. So for me, it was very much like ensuring that I was comfortable with their approach and intentions. And as Blanca kind of touched upon, it was a lot of like open and transparent communication, and just generally like establishing clear boundaries. I definitely feel like when people ask me about like working with journalists, directors and producers and stuff, I describe it as kind of quite similar to finding yourself a counsellor. You need to feel connected, safe and comfortable enough to do so. You don't necessarily need to settle for the first one as such. Like I've met numerous journalists post this documentary, and I definitely didn't feel the same kind of connection and safety that Blanca, Emma and everyone involved in the documentary essentially nurtured that safe space for me. And I think that kind of also reflects in the documentary how I felt so at ease, and they were essentially an extension of myself, that there was no kind of voyeuristic nature. They were involved along with me on that journey.
And that's lovely to hear that. And Blanca, when it comes to the decisions that you had to make around the use of music and props and covering shots, and the intention to build emotion but still effectively demonstrate those poignant points, were they conscious decisions and something that you discussed with Jade? Because obviously editorially you're limited in the sense of what you can and can't share ahead of the final product, but how did you approach that?
Of course, I mean, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Jade, because it really means a lot, and I know to Emma, who worked alongside Jade for 3 years, it means a lot, Jade. I'd say, that when you do these stories, a lot of the people, they Jade felt that she had been failed by the system at the end of the day, by the police, by the justice system, who was supposed to protect and represent people who have been through horrific crimes. So she had been failed. And I think there was a serious risk of being able to re-traumatize Jade by betraying that trust that she was giving us. And I'd say that we took that as a big, big responsibility, that was always on our shoulders, and in the conversations that we had. Like, I remember, for example, like Jade told Emma that she wanted to actually burn the underwear that she was wearing the night she was raped, as a way to reclaim her story, which we thought was so powerful, and that says so much of Jade and how she is and how she's been, and she's a fighter. And I remember being in one of these rooms actually at the BBC thinking, can we even ask her to film that? Is it our place to be there? It's very intimate. She wanted to be with her best friends who've been with you, Jade, along the way, and we do remember again, we could be, by putting a camera in there, ruining that very important moment for Jade. So I think something that we always had clear is that as long as Jade was happy with that, is to ask for expert advice from a psychologist as well. So ahead of some of this filming, which again, you know, very sensitive and intimate to Jade, we always check if Jade wanted to have a session with an expert psychologist who has experience in understanding whether by filming with a contributor we could be exposing them to further harm. And that was always very important for us, but to make sure that Jade was happy with us doing that, of course, you know. And I say in the end, you know, it was decided, you know, by all of us, you know, that was a good thing, that Jade was happy with it, her friends as well. And in the end, actually, it ended up being such a poignant moment at the end of the film. And I mean, of course, Jade can tell us more about if she wants to, you know, add on it. But yeah, it was always very conscious, because as I said, you know, we just couldn't betray the trust that Jade had put on us, which we are another part of the system that she felt had failed her. So it was a serious risk of re-traumatizing Jade.
And you've already mentioned it, but it was over 3 years, and Jade, you literally went on such a journey, and the process in itself was remarkable. And we didn't know quite where it was going to go editorially either. There was no like, oh, we're going to wait until this is the finish line. But throughout that process as well, you obviously connected with various other contributors, and there were sensitivities too around those relationships, and both for you and for the production team. And I was hoping that you could just speak to that time frame of the 3 years, and it's still going on for you, I know that, but yeah, it would be great to have some insight as to what that felt like and what, you know, what that was like for you.
I mean, yeah, certainly. I think filming across a 3-year time frame, or doing any project over 3 years, is quite a hefty one, and can present numerous challenges, essentially. I'd say probably like commitment and endurance, essentially like sustaining the interest and maintaining that kind of enthusiasm and engagement. Myself, I guess, especially like those times during COVID when kind of things waned a little bit, and I didn't know if anything was ever going to come of my story, essentially, because we just didn't know. The world was like closing down as such, and then there was like BBC restructures and things, but again, with the open transparency and communication, we all still had this weird drive to just carry on doing the story anyway and just rolling with it, which was kind of like all in it together. Sometimes it was just me and Emma for a couple of months, and then like other people joined. But yeah, I would say as everything kind of unfolded in real time, like with the case closure, this notion of Sexsomnia, and essentially the admission of the mistake by the CPS, all of those kind of just like re-energized me every single time, and kind of reaffirmed to me that I had made the right decision, essentially, to share my story, and how essentially blessed I was that I had Emma, Blanca and the BBC team alongside to share that experience. I think it just provided such an interesting kind of insight into the criminal justice system that was literally unfolding in real time. Like, as you said, like we had no idea that was going to happen. So just kind of rolling with it as such. No one could have predicted how that was going to turn out. But I think also, like emotional fatigue as well. Like I look back on it now, at the time I was probably still running on a bit of like adrenaline, like feeling like I was fighting the system, and also had an opportunity to share my experience, and kind of, I think by sharing it with the team, it allowed me to probably process it more than I would have done if I just sat with it myself, which is a bit weird, kind of a bit cathartic as such. Probably not for everyone, but it worked a treat for me. But it was very emotionally and physically draining at times. And during like hefty days of filming things, like I would be very kind of emotionally drained as such, but I would be like still really engaged in the process. But when we finished, as soon as like the cameras are off, I'd be exhausted, and I'd just go home and just like sleep for like 12 hours. Like I essentially just trauma dumped all day, and it would be exhausting. But as Blanca said, there was lots of safeguards in place, regular check-in, the psychologist and things, just to kind of really ensure that I was still in a good headspace to be able to continue navigating this. But yeah, there was lots of good safeguards in place and constant communication, which kind of just set me at ease anyway for every kind of element of the process.
And Blanca, from a production point of view, you've got 3 years of content shot on different cameras in different formats by different people at different times. And also Jade did the most remarkable video diaries, and, you know, going through all of that. What was that experience like? Because that sounds quite epic from a production point of view.
Yeah, could I just say actually that it was so interesting to listen to Jade now and how exhausted, physically and emotionally exhausted she was. I didn't know that, for example, she had to go and sleep 12 hours, you know, after filming sometimes, you know. So that's, you know, that's really good for us to know, because you might think you not necessarily of, you know, it's only taking an hour, it's only taking two, but actually, God, yeah, what you are asking from someone is just so massive. So it's just a very good reminder, you know, for all of us, even when you are filming, to have breaks and not take anything for granted, really. So yeah, I mean, it was it was epic, you know, in terms of the edit, because it was, you know, at the end of the day, God, an hour feels like a lot, but when it comes to 3 years of someone's life on the most difficult time, probably, you know, you are just all the time like thinking whether this is the right way to tell the story. You know, it's not even about the volume of rushes. Sometimes it's like how you tell it in a way, you know, that really portrays it fairly accurately, and that the Jade is gonna feel proud of, but also that's gonna help represent what so many, like thousands of victims actually go through when the case gets to the justice system. So again, we argued so many times. We argue, like, you know, just discussions and saying, let's do it this way, no, let's do it this other way. And I think it always helped us a lot to have advice, you know, from execs, Kim, from, you know, from other colleagues, you know, from the editor as well. So make sure, you know, that we had that support as well, because again, we didn't want to get it wrong, you know, and of course from Jade as well. So, you know, it was happy, but again, you know, we knew what we were doing was important. And I think that's what really drives you. And especially knowing that, as Jade says, you know, she had this massive drive of telling her story to be able to help others, you know. So I think that really moved us, although obviously, you know, we understand our job is to tell the story, what happens with it in terms of the justice system, and it's not up to us, isn't it? But I guess that motivation and what really kept us going was also Jade, to be honest, you know, to be like, you know, this, you know, this needs to be good, it's important. And I think, you know, when you know you've got a good story, you know, and it's gonna matter and it might have impact, that's what really drives you. So it doesn't matter how many like drives you have across so many years, it's just worth it, and you know it is.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I wish I could talk to you for longer. If the audience have questions, please do put them in the Q&A box and we can put them to Jade and Blanca at the end. But Jade, I wanted to leave you with the final word in how it's been received, the impact of the film, and how you are now.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, the completion of the documentary and having it out is a moment of immense pride. I mean, 3 years of filming, as Blanca said, captured a lot of footage, and obviously a lot was not included, but nevertheless the story was told so beautifully and portrayed the challenges faced when seeking justice. Emma and her team, they exhibited empathy, compassion, professionalism while capturing my life's most intimate moments as it was crumbling around me, and they've really left a lasting impact for which I will be eternally grateful for. I think their influence has fueled my unwavering commitment to use my voice moving forward, speaking boldly and being heard. I think I owe an immeasurable gratitude to Blanca, Emma, Kim, yourself, and the entire team. Your profound impact has shaped my life, and this story is powerful and resounding and owes its existence to you guys. Without you, this story would not have been told. So thank you.
I don't think we're ever going to forget you, Jade, for sure. But thank you so much. I have to leave it there with you. Like I say, we will come to some questions at the end, so please do stay around. But brings me now the greatest pleasure to introduce Ashni Lakhani. There she is. Thank you. Ashni, your work often seeks to unveil stories that can get sidelined by the mainstream agenda. And you've done everything from turkey teeth and weight loss surgery to the impact of leaked explicit images to navigating the stigma of HIV. And you've often had to get quite creative with how you get audiences to engage with the subject matter, because it's not overtly visual. And I remember watching your HIV film and the use of glitter and things like that. But I was wondering if you could give some more examples of how you've overcome that in your work.
Yeah, of course. Before I do, hello everyone. Thank you for having me as well. And lovely to everyone watching. Yeah, you're right. The topics I cover, they're, you know, sensitive topics, taboo topics, they aren't inherently visual. So I have had to get creative. I mean, you mentioned one of the examples, which was the film about HIV. So it was a 15-minute YouTube documentary aimed at young audiences. We're talking 18 to 32. And the whole point was to feature young people who were living with HIV and really show what their lives were like, and, you know, essentially combat the stigma that they're still living with and show how they're basically living normal lives. And, you know, one of the visual techniques I used in that was a hell of a lot of glitter, which was essentially an aesthetic that was trending at the time. It was a visual aesthetic, you know, on Pinterest, on Instagram, on YouTube even, that the people that I wanted to watch the film, the young people, were really into. And so essentially what we did was, you know, we started to write our chapter headings in glitter. We had our main character essentially like playing with the glitter. The whole, you know, we even incorporated glitter into these pills, which the whole point was, you know, nowadays you just have to take a pill and go in glitter. And, you know, I think using a technique like this is not belittling a film. It's not taking away from the seriousness of a topic. The point is we're adding a visual element that just entices the audience, encapsulates them, but also fits with the theme, which is, you know, we led up to a really empowering photo shoot where the main character invited all the contributors in the film, and essentially they were all playing with glitter in this film. It's just really aesthetic and a really nice way to bring it all together and tie in that, like, we're going to beat the stigma kind of message that was coming across.
On that point, like with the contributor, how do you say to her, right, I've got this load of glitter, can you just get in there, throw it around a bit? How do you sell that? Because it's a sensitive subject, isn't it? And how do you make that creativity shine through and help her see potentially what you're trying to achieve with it?
Well, genuinely, these conversations are really early on. We talk about, you know, like what she wants from the film, why she's telling a story, what we really want this to be about. And what I kept hearing was empowering, positive. You know, I really want to get across how normal my life is, that I'm just a young, normal person who likes everyday things. So then I started to, you know, come up with a couple of ideas of how we could visually show that. And glitter came out quite soon. And genuinely, it didn't take much convincing. She was very on board with it. And we tied it into the narrative. You know, it wasn't like I was shoving random bits of glitter during a really important interview. It wasn't like that at all. It was just small little pockets of it. But the idea was we brought some colour to the film and hit that positive note. And, you know, she loved it, basically.
And Jade and Blanca were talking about, you know, managing the sensitivities and the vulnerabilities and getting people to trust you. Yeah. How have you done that in your work, particularly the panoramas that you've worked on, and also the aesthetic kind of elements too? Because there was undercover filming, it was very up close and personal and quite visceral. How have you approached that from a production point of view?
Yeah, whenever I'm you know, thinking about making a documentary about a particular person or a topic, and I've got a key contributor, the main thing in my head that I want at the end of the day is for that contributor to feel so comfortable and in control of this process to the level that they can be. And when we get into that final interview room, I tend to do master interviews. When we get into that final master interview, I want that person to be so comfortable, they forget a camera's there. They have really built such a strong trust with me that they feel like they're talking to a mate. And, you know, for the audience, it's going to come across really well as well, that they're so natural and that they're feeling so comfortable enough to explain something really concisely and clearly. So to get to that point, essentially, is a lot of little production techniques. So I will meet my key contributors several times before we get into that interview room. I'll be having coffees, and I'll never really meet them in an office as well. I want to get to know them. I want to really hear their stories if they're talking to a friend. And then we'll start to discuss the boundaries of what they are willing to share on camera, what they aren't. And I'll stick to that, you know. During these like meetings, we'll start to talk about the process of what production looks like. I haven't done 3-year productions though, so I'm not sure about that one. Well, you know, I'll talk about on when we're filming, there's going to be these people in the room. There might be men in the room. There might be POC people in the room, someone from the same community. What makes you comfortable? And I'll adhere to whatever they come up with. You know, on the day, I've got loads of little techniques that I use, depending on who I'm interviewing, from wearing like cute little stupid socks that start an interview, like start a conversation, that take the pressure away, to a meme top, you know, just depending on who it is. I like that. Just so the conversation's about that and they feel really comfortable, we could chat about that and they don't tend to notice that a camera's being set up in the room. So yeah, it's a really long process essentially to get to that point where people feel really comfortable. And then you've got, you know, your general production techniques of letting them know, you know, we can take breaks. We are going to take breaks. They can stop the camera whenever they want. You know, they know what questions are coming. I've briefed them so clearly that they know the order things are coming in. You know, they're really prepared for it.
It's funny hearing you say that, the distraction techniques. It almost sounds like you're going for an operation or something. Don't think about it.
An array of brilliant socks, put it that way.
But I mean, tonight we have an incredible panel of women here. Would you say that that in itself is an important factor to be able to build trust with contributors? If you're telling a woman's story about themes that affect predominantly women, is that a factor?
Yeah, I mean, it's a factor in building trust with your contributor, absolutely. Getting them to trust you, you know, like I can't deny that I've definitely understood and connected with people a lot more because I'm a woman. I can understand the certain stories we're talking about, whether it's sexual assault or, you know, I did a panorama about nude images being leaked and shared. And I definitely know the people I spoke to wouldn't have spoken to anyone else. And part of that panorama was speaking to young Asian women who spoke up for the first time ever. And it was because I came from that background as well that I could really understand the damage these images have caused on their lives and the bravery it was taking for them to speak out and, you know, to be part of the program potentially. So yeah, I think when it comes to building trust, you know, being a woman, and kudos for having a women only panel here, but that's definitely helped. And I think it also gives you another level of responsibility, you know, as a filmmaker, as to how you portray this, how you want this to come across. That's not to say though, you know, like you can't build connections and cover stories if you aren't, you know, from a similar identity to the people you're covering. But yeah, I think it's definitely resulted in me finding a lot more common ground with a lot of the stories that I've made.
And you've touched on this already when it comes to relationship building, but how important is that element of aftercare and support? And we heard from Jade and Blanca how well that was managed in their case. But you do need boundaries, like you were alluding to. And so therefore, how do you manage relationships and building that trust and building that rapport and getting them to open up to you? But at the same time, managing your own boundaries and well-being and mental health and making sure that you're not necessarily taking calls from them at 3 a.m. and you can actually limit that. Is that possible? And what's your experience of that been like?
It's really difficult. It's really difficult. It's definitely something I've had to give a lot of time and thought to make sure that I have the right boundaries that still allow me to make the programs I want and build those connections. I think the key tips are work phone and personal phone, separate those. Also, you know, I think I tend to think of the production in stages. And especially when we're filming, going through that process, I am very available to my contributors and to people I'm talking to. But later on in the film, like when we get closer to the edits and when I'm starting to think about a bit more of the storytelling, you know, I'll have really transparent conversations about the timings that we should talk about things. I also make it really clear with my contributors that, you know, like it's a two-way process. So when do they want me contacting them and vice versa? They'd usually ask me the same question, and then we can set really clear kind of boundaries. But it's definitely something, you know, I've struggled with, and it takes a lot of work. But you know, aftercare as well, you mentioned is a big part of this. It's a really important process. I know Jade mentioned there that, you know, she had a psychologist, and that's definitely something I've employed for a lot of the people I've spoken to, and it's really helped them during the process. But just making it really clear when you will be checking in after a film goes out is so important. You know, like I try to build a boundary quite clearly at that point where I'm saying, you know, I'll be checking in on the day after, and a week later, and that gives everyone a bit of space as well.
That was something we were always really mindful of. Obviously, I used to work with the BBC, but once the programme goes out, I remember Andy Murray or someone saying, Wimbledon was amazing, I won the trophy. And then a week later, it's like, oh, there's nothing now. There's literally it. So like you say, it's a high, and it's like, oh yes, people are listening to my story, but it's managing that petering out and that, you know, the sustenance and the ongoing relationship. Is that what you found in the projects that you've worked on?
Definitely. And what I would say is, you know, I am still in touch with a lot of the people I've made films about. not daily, not regularly, but we are in touch, and they know they can contact me, and that has really helped to peter it out. You know, it's not a complete close off, because when you work so closely with someone who's sharing their story for the first time, neither of you, you know, really want to cut communication completely. We're all human after all. But it does absolutely peter out, and you need to make sure you're doing that correctly.
I wanted to ask you what your marker of success is, because your work, it looks to expand audience reach and appeal to underserved sectors of society, and you've achieved significant national impact with what you've done, and you've influenced legislative changes, easy for me to say, and like it's been award-winning. But is that something you can strive for, or even imagine from when you start that commissioning process?
We're all ambitious, Kim. So you can strive for it, but genuinely, that's not a marker of success for me for one of my films. When I'm like making a film, especially about a really sensitive topic, I usually have a really, really clear audience in mind as to who I'm making this film for. And my measure of success is, have they watched it? So it's usually in a small niche group. You know, for example, when I was making the Panorama program about explicit images being shared, it was really focused on young Asian women that this was happening to. So I was desperate for these young Asian women who would definitely not normally be watching panoramas to see this program. So how was and that impacted every production and editorial decision I made. And then the marker of success was, you know, were the Asian aunties sharing it in their WhatsApp? Like, did I get into those community groups? So each film for me has a really set specific audience, and I'll know where they are, because I'll have researched them and spoken to them even in the process of making the film. And then it's whether it naturally gets shared in those spaces. That's the real moment of success for me.
I think also something that you're really good at is impact. And like you say, really early on, engaging different departments of the BBC, because unfortunately it is quite siloed, but you know, going to BBC Breakfast or the One Show or Woman's Hour or online or radio, whatever, local radio, all of those things, they work quite disparately, but it's making sure that they're all included when you're thinking about how you want this to roll out. That's maybe part of it that people don't appreciate potentially, because you do it slightly differently. It's nuanced on each of these occasions, isn't it? You're doing it differently each time.
That's right. You're essentially coming up with a slightly different line or you know, contributor that you think might play better to that particular audience of a different BBC or whatever platform. Yeah, this stuff does filter into some of the more editorial decisions, especially when you're talking about, you know, the legislative changes. Definitely always strive for it, but realistically, it's just not. It shouldn't be your marker of success.
Again, I wish I had more time to talk to you, but please do put questions to Ashni as well in the Q&A, and we will definitely come to some questions at the end. But could I just leave by asking what you're up to now, where you are, what life's like? Yes, you've just made a big move, haven't you?
I've made a big move. Yeah, I've left the BBC and I've moved to Dubai. So I'm actually freelancing out here in documentaries and telly, and I'm covering stories across the Middle East.
Thank you so much, Ashni. We will come back to you very shortly. But now I would like to bring in both Polly and SUKKI. They've been waiting very patiently. Thank you so much. And I think the best way to introduce you both is for us to play the trailer from your remarkable short film, I See Her. Well, that's just the ultimate tease, isn't it? But SUKKI, Polly, thank you so much for being here. SUKKI, could you tell us more about the inspiration behind this incredible film?
Yes, wow, it's so emotional watching that back, just knowing how much went into that. But it really was inspired by a combination of things, partly because of the Sharan project, of which Polly is the founder. Polly and I have been working together for almost 10 years now. And what she does, which I'll let her talk about, and her charity to support women, particularly vulnerable women of South, has been nothing short of heroic. So really, I wanted to create the film to not just support Polly, but also post-pandemic, I'd seen horrific statistics about a rise in abuse of women and girls. And with my work with the charity and on seeing those statistics, and also an opportunity that came in to create content about that, it really felt like a great time to not just post about something, to not just, you know, get something out on social media, but to do something that would be higher impact, to create something that possibly could be used as a tool. So it sort of turned into a short film, which has been wonderful. But really, what I always had in mind with the creation of that was, yes, it's a short film, but how can this also be used as a tool and a resource to really help stop the abuse of women and girls, and just reduce that number as much as we physically possibly could. And hopefully we've been able to achieve a small percentage of that.
And Polly, tell us more about how this collaboration with SUKKI and her team has come about, and also how your impressions of the film and its handling of such a sensitive and provocative subject.
Absolutely. So as SUKKI suggested, we met each other over 10 years ago, and we immediately clicked. We're from very different parts of the world, and so much as I'm in the charity sector, my day job is supporting vulnerable women affected by abuse or persecution. So we come from very different worlds. However, when we talked about creating this film, it was really important to both of us that it was authentic and it had the voices of true survivors. And so as you go through the film, it was really important to have that empowering feel to the film, that quite often when it comes to depictions of victims and survivors, and particularly those of people of colour, it's often they're submissive, they're weak, they are a certain way. And we really wanted to break those taboos for one, to sort of recognise that it's not just the person who's been affected by abuse, but it's everyone around us. And the empowering messaging coming from that film was very much that everyone can play a part to end domestic abuse. And that was a really powerful statement throughout the film. So for me, it was really important to make sure the authenticity of the voices of the victims and survivors that we work with on a daily basis was reflected authentically throughout the storyline.
It certainly has been. And SUKKI, to talk more about the production approach itself, there's an international team behind it. It was filmed domestically, but with a hybrid approach to the post-production. Can you tell me more, or explain to me more about the conscious decisions you made around that process?
Yeah, I think that really boils down to where I thought the film would be received. And also just the kind of connections that I'd made in the industry. And as I say, it was a film sort of for a charity with a charity. So there was no discernible budget whatsoever. The budget was us. So we were really relying on volunteers and incredible people that could help us. Obviously, having made those international connections, as Polly said, us coming from very different backgrounds, I sort of lent on my international filmmaking friends quite a lot. So it ended up being a hybrid production. But also, you might notice if you do eventually watch the film when it's released, that there's no spoken word. And I made that decision because I really wanted it to reach every single community, no matter the language barrier, culture, race, community, origin. I really wanted everyone to be able to watch it and understand the meaning without the need of it being specified to one particular culture. So then I feel like that film had created this organic, this is for something bigger, this is a global film. And so reaching out to those production teams, we ended up working with incredible teams in Brisbane and Los Angeles, and then the wonderful volunteers that we had in terms of the film crew, incredible film crew, headed up by our cinematographer Charlie Knight, composer Ruthless, who were based in the UK. And it then really took on this is a global film, because the rising cases of abuse is not just affecting specifically South Asian culture. It's not just affecting women and girls in the UK, but unfortunately, this rise post-pandemic is occurring globally. And what can we do to really help push that out?
And you already referenced the artistic choice for it there to be no dialogue other than British Sign Language, and there's no sound other than Atmos and a school choir. Also, you never see the violence. Could you explain the reasoning behind those artistic choices, but also like leaning back to what Polly was saying earlier about depictions in the media of violence? So I will bring Polly in, I suppose, for the second part of that question.
Yeah, I wanted to create a film because we see a lot of films of abuse. I don't know whether that's a good thing, because obviously they're needed, but unfortunately, because they're so needed, there are so many. So it's almost a bittersweet situation that we're one of many. But because of that, I felt like that oftentimes, sometimes when we're seeing films depicting abuse, it can be slightly gratuitous in terms of violence. And I felt very much like, firstly, we need to stop it at the root cause. We need to be able to create a film that can educate, the younger generation also to take responsibility and accountability and to understand. And often children are observers and bystanders of abuse. So I wanted to create something that wasn't too alarming for children, so that we could be able to educate sort of people on all levels to become an active bystander. So that was part of it. But the other thing I find uncomfortable is that by portraying the violence, and this is kind of subjective really, I felt like that gives so much power to the perpetrator of abuse. It almost creates a sympathy. And I do believe that there's often deep trauma and terrible reasons for people to become a certain way. But I think that in doing this film, I didn't want to make it about that. I didn't want us to imagine the perpetrator of abuse and why is this happening. I really wanted to focus on the protagonist, and I also really wanted to focus on, to be honest with you, the neighbour in this film, because the neighbour is us. So more than sort of the victim and the survivor of abuse, really shifting that angle to us feeling like we ought to take responsibility. So that's why it didn't really have any scenes where you can see the full physicality of the perpetrator of abuse.
And Polly, I know that you work really closely with SUKKI on that element of the film, and you've already referenced how you find more generally media depictions of domestic abuse and how accurate they are. So how important was it for you to get it right with this film?
It was hugely important. And bearing in mind, I have no connection with media at all in the filmmaking industry. So it was an eye-opener for me too. But one thing that both of us were really keen to do was ensure that the crew and the staff and the cast really got to understand not just the concept of domestic abuse, but also the multiple intersectional layers of trauma that that person can experience in order to take on those roles and those responsibilities throughout the film. So it was really important that we weren't just throwing narratives at people, but they understood. And the best way to understand that is to hear those stories and to understand the impact it can have. So that was hugely important for us. But equally, as SUKKI said, it was about the future. It was about the long term. What the film does really beautifully is when somebody engages with our service, it's usually crisis intervention. It's usually something really horrible has happened and it's never their fault. And what this film demonstrated was that journey from where they are through to recovery to successfully leading an independent life without fear. And that's our job as a service, to guide those people through that journey. So being able to depict that through the film was a beautiful way of almost paying homage to every survivor and every victim, to say there is a positive future in going forward. So that was a really important and powerful piece for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that SUKKI, you've spoken before about your hope and desire for it to be used as a tool for primarily for the Sharan project, but also more generally for an educative purpose as well.
Yeah, I think Polly would agree for that. Yes, it is something that the Sharan project can use, because the Sharan project is hugely involved in so many of these cases in the United Kingdom. And so it was like a filmmaking gift, I suppose. But really, it's also a tool that I wanted to be used beyond that. And also, yes, it does depict domestic violence, but I wanted it also to be a tool more generally about abuse of women and girls in all capacities, so that we just become more aware. I mean, we're in a society where we're more connected than we've ever been. Here we are on a, online event. We're so connected, and yet there's that terrible disconnect of through a screen. And so I just wanted to kind of really use this film as a tool to dismantle that and make us a little bit more aware just in general about things such as just checking in on your neighbor, just checking in on the person that you might be sitting next to on the bus, checking in on people that you might be sort of seeing in the street. I think as well, we've created these very insular environments just in general in life where we're stuck in our own bubble, and we've lost that sense of family on earth. I know that sounds very overarching, but we really have. And so I wanted to just use, and I kind of really, the fence in the film, there's a fence that separates the two, the neighbor and the Mina, who's played by Nikita. There's a fence that separates their households, and really that just kind of became a metaphor for me of that's a mobile phone screen. That straight line is a screen of which we're divided by, and just to make people a little bit more aware of maybe where it's safe to do so, talking to somebody, where you feel like it's safe to do so, the power of physical touch and embracing somebody in a hug when they need it. I think that's so important as a wider message to just break down, because as Polly said, the sooner we capture it, the better. We don't want to be reactive. We really wanted to create something that was proactive to stop it rather than react to it.
Yeah, there are so many nuances and sub-themes to the film. I'm sure people are desperate to know where they can watch it, and we will come to that, I promise. But Polly, what are your hopes for the film and how it will be received, and how the Sharan project can hopefully benefit?
Absolutely. So when you watch this film, you can't unsee it. And so the impact it has on one person could rip it through to so many others. So what we're really hoping is that by using the film, whether it's in our educational training, whether it's in our professional training with frontline professionals and staff, and the community, because ultimately it's about reaching into those communities where these issues occur, where they are often held behind closed doors or not spoken about. These are the spaces that we really want this film to reach. But in doing so, creating or starting a conversation. Did you see that film? What did you think? And really having those conversations, whether it's on certain platforms or with your family or with your friends, whoever it might be. It's to inform people that when it comes to domestic abuse, it's not a homogenous issue. Every victim survivor is going to have a very different experience, but the ultimate impact it has doesn't have to be that way. We can all play our part to make sure that we can end violence against women and girls.
It's very powerful. I just wanted to quickly say we will be coming to questions very shortly. So if you do have any, please do put them in the box for all of the panelists tonight. So Jade, Blanca, Ashni, Polly and SUKKI, please do feel free to do that, and we will come to them very shortly. But SUKKI, I wanted to come back to you because I know obviously with this film, you're collaborating with UN Women UK for a screening for the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and there are grand plans. So I don't know if you can speak a bit more to that as to what how it's going to roll out and the impact it could potentially have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think timing, whenever you're making a film as a filmmaker, there's always that terrible thing, which I'm learning, and I'm sure everyone else is much more au fait with the procedures, but when to release the film was a big part of our consideration, and how can this create the biggest impact? How can it really make a difference? And obviously this month, November, the time of which we're discussing this, is International Domestic Abuse Awareness Month, and specifically the 25th of November is the start of the United Nations 16 Days of Activism. So every single day until the 10th of December, they'll be pushing out initiatives on perhaps raising awareness or just highlighting various people within sort of change makers who can make a difference, or perhaps what you can do in tools for change. And we really wanted to be a part of the tools for change and utilize that moment to really help where it was needed the most and where there was that global spotlight. So we're so utterly grateful to be able to be, as you say, supported by United Nations Women UK. And that was really, that was just, it felt organically right to be able to start releasing content about the film during that month.
And Polly, what next for you and the Sharan project? What grand plans do you have for the future?
Right, well, we've been in operation for the last 15 years and we're applying for a specialist service. So the fact that we got to work with such incredible cast and crew to make this incredible film is still sinking in for me, because usually when a charity works on creating a production, it's got lots of money, it's well backed and everything else. So we're not taking for granted that we've got this gift, this amazing product, this amazing film. So what we want to do is to start utilising distribution channels as to how we can get this distributed as widely as possible, but also to measure the impact, because 100,000 people could see it, but what's the impact of that? So that's the next step for us, is measuring that impact and making sure it's getting into the right spaces to make the most impact for those who might be affected, and also to prevent it happening. When somebody sees something so profound, hopefully it will, quite often if somebody's going through abuse, it's not always physical. So actually what the film also does is it lends itself to the non-physical forms of abuse, and just start thinking about domestic abuse in certain circles would hopefully allow those conversations and stop it from happening, or at the very least encourage people or empower them to stand up and say, are you okay? Is there anything we can do? And that, as humanity, I think is the best thing we could ask for.
That sounds amazing. And SUKKI, where can people go if they want to find out more about the film?
Absolutely. So on the 25th of November, which is the start of 16 days of activism, we will be able to sign up to the waiting list to watch the film. So that will be on the website, which is www.iseeherthefilm.com. There'll be a button there which says join the waiting list to watch the film, and you'll be able to watch that through a private link. Also, we have our Instagram page, just if you want to be part of the conversations. As Polly says, it's great that we have this film. We're so fortunate, and I feel, incredibly inspired that we've managed to create this, but really, how can this help start conversations? So on Instagram, if you want to join us and be part of that, that's at I See Her the Film on Instagram as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you both so much. And if I can, I'd like to try and bring in the rest of the panel if the technology will allow us to do that. So we do have a few questions. So let's bring everybody back in. Is everyone there? Lovely. So some comments for you, Jade and Blanca. It was an amazing, brave and affecting film. Thank you both for talking about it. Ice, I hope I've said that correctly. Hi Jade, it's Ice. I said it before, and I will say always how you're so amazing. So getting a lot of love here. And another one for Jade. Can you say, Jade, what was the main thing that made you trust Blanca and her team to tell your story? And I suppose I want to put that to everyone else as well, because I feel like that was a recurring theme throughout this chat, trust and vulnerability. So we could start with Jade, and maybe if we could go around to everybody else.
Okay, fab. Oh gosh, well, I was connected initially through the Victims Commissioner of London, so I kind of almost felt like I had a bit of a safe avenue in as such. And then Emma reached out to me via email, started with a few emails, a few calls, and then finally met over coffee. But yeah, I just felt that she had like an actual genuine interest in sharing my story. And I think a lot of it is just having a bit of a gut feeling about like how that person is. You tend to have a good gauge of people, right? So yeah, the connection with her, I feel like from the get-go, I just had like a real genuine feel from her, and that definitely developed over time and kind of really reaffirmed that I had made a good decision connecting with her. But yeah, as I said, it's a bit odd. It's a whole gut feeling, and she was very frank and open. And it's funny because she explained on numerous occasions and essentially advised to me that, oh, Jade, there's so many risks. You don't do it. It's fine. Like, so I guess having that open and honest side of things, giving me both sides to make a really informed decision to engage in that process. But same with everyone like Blanca as well. Yeah. Everyone that was introduced in that kind of production team, I feel as if they were almost like cherry picked. Everyone was like so nice, and they had like a real genuine gelled team and good rapport between themselves that just kind of completely set me at ease. So yeah, super positive vibes.
Blanca, what was it like on the other side from a trust point of view and allowing someone to be vulnerable?
Sorry, Kim, did you address it to me? Apologies, sorry.
That was to
sorry.
you. That was to you.
Yeah, I've got to say that sometimes, it's difficult because when I joined the team, Emma, who's, the director and who really, led the film, she had a really good relationship with Jade. And it's very difficult sometimes to come and join a project because you don't want to ruin it, precisely. You don't know whether I hadn't worked with Emma before. Obviously, I had heard great things about her. I didn't know Jade. So I think something that Emma did so well is that we all met up again for a coffee before Emma deciding whether I would be good for the team or not. She wanted to make sure that Jade felt comfortable. She wanted to see me sitting down with Jade and thinking this is good for Jade or not. So sometimes it is also difficult when you actually come to a team and the relationship is already there, because we all have different ways of managing trust. And sometimes actually I come across a bit more informal, which is my style. It doesn't mean I'm not professional, but I am informal, and that's the way I am. And it doesn't always gel with other, like, how people work. So I would say that again, it's just really like, taking every story you do with a great sense of responsibility, managing expectations, being very honest, and being genuinely interested. I just couldn't do a story if I'm not interested in it. That's why I left news. Because obviously you are interested, but you don't have enough time to develop that interest. So anyway, I'll let other people talk, but it's each relationship is different anyway.
Yeah, and that's what you were saying, Ashni, wasn't it? Really, it's literally getting to know somebody, finding out where the boundaries are and that's the foundations of building trust, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think it's a two-part process from the journalist and filmmaker's point of view as well. You want to really get to know whose story and what you might be committing potentially years of your professional life to, and it does have to be something you really believe in, so that you can get through that end process where you're really pulling at straws and watching the same film for the 20th 200th time. You really have to care about it. So yeah, it's a lot of coffees, a lot of chatting, and then again it's a gut feeling, like Jade said.
Yeah, and like SUKKI and Polly, you fundamentally have to trust each other, right? Like, because this film wouldn't have gone anywhere if in the first instance you guys hadn't actually got that affinity of trusting and believing and wanting to work together. So it's the same kind of there's a parallel there, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, sorry, go on, Polly. You first, please.
I was just going to say, there is, however, I've had the privilege of knowing SUKKI for a very long time. And during those years, she has demonstrated time and time again her commitment to the charity and to the cause. And so for us, particularly when we had the Girls Summit, and you posed a question to the then PM on behalf of the charity, which went viral, but it really raised the profile of what we were trying to do. So I knew I could trust in SUKKI, but SUKKI also knew she could trust in me to be honest and authentic about how things are and how they should be portrayed. And that was reciprocated in the making of the film. So SUKKI, I don't know if you wanted to say anything more to that.
You are absolutely 100%. It was totally a two-way street. I'd known Polly for the longest time, and I don't profess to be an expert. I know how certain things feel. I'm very emotionally led when it comes to sort of my creative side of things, and I knew how I wanted it to feel, and I knew how to make it impactful, but real nuances, and ensuring that the messaging was right. We had a survivor, Calbeer, who also starred in the film, and just ensuring she felt safe and represented in the correct way. The language of which to describe the film, really trusted in Polly to be able to kind of shine light and show the way, so that even the verbiage felt empowering and not condescending in any way. And that all of those little nuances, I think as filmmakers, when we're doing cause-based films, we can run with our heart and we can create something that's incredibly painful and emotional. But I think if it's not backed up with that sensitivity of, are the survivors, or victims correctly represented? Do they feel empowered by this? Or do they feel, is that connection there on that really sort of technical level? Are we doing the right thing, or is this a piece of, I hate to say it, dramatization? Just that fine balance when you're doing cause-based films. And I was just so grateful to be able to have Polly take the reins on all of that.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to be very unprofessional and shout out to my 7-year-old daughter who has been listening. I hope we haven't traumatized her. And please, if you are looking for support links and networks, they will be online. So please go to the RTS website. But yeah, and Florence, do go to bed for your father, please. Thank you. That is all we've got time for. I'd like to say my most enormous thank yous to this illustrious panel: Jade Blue McCrossen-Nethercott, Blanca Muñoz, Ashni Lakhani, Polly Harrar, and SUKKI. You are all Wonder Women, and I can't thank you enough for your time with me here today. And you can find more information about other fabulous events available from the Royal Television Society at rts.org.uk/events. Thank you all, and see you later.